Good evening, everyone. Time for episode 10 of Kerr's Rage, part 1 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga by me. I'm going to start out with the Great North Sea chapter on page 117. Here we go. Winter was coming swiftly, and the ship's captain was hard-pressed to avoid the many bergs of ice that plagued the frigid waters. The great floes often seemed safely distant, but they possessed hidden dangers, for they often projected deadly limbs just beneath the ocean's surface that might extend far out from them. But with the help of their seer, they were able to find safe pathways through the ice floes that would otherwise have been impossible to find. And now their voyage was about to come to a close. Merely 2 days remained between them and the Bay of Cod, the doorway into Firminor that would lead them directly into the northern reaches, a treacherous range of mountains, ice, and snow. Vlad had been given extensive orders. He was to travel to the Orcs' pyramid fortress, Dracon Muirfalor, in that region, and report to the High Priestess in command of their Red Orcan forces there. The Orcs were new and powerful allies, and their strong tribal sense of honor made them ideal partners in Dragonia's plans for world domination. His task was to further strengthen their alliance and to begin planning for a full-scale invasion of the Firmish region known as Safe Haven. It would be a challenging enterprise, for Lord Cherrick protected those lands, and he was the Five Kingdoms' last and most powerful king in those northern territories. But Vlad had a purpose greater even than his appointed orders. His secret agenda would guarantee his place in history. It was a secret that only he and a handful of his most trusted followers possessed. His conspiracy began with his discovery of Imperium, and then later with Derek's recovery of the Rod of the Staff during the course of his studies. The ship had told Vlad that 2 more components of the staff had been hidden in the very region toward which they traveled. If they could find this weapon, what power Dragonia would possess, what power he would wield to ensure their victory. Yet absolute secrecy was the key to that success, for he knew of the temptations of power. He knew that the lords of Dragonia would surely kill him for pursuing such secret agenda. Lothia's ways of darkness could only serve to keep Dragonia from absolute victory. Her ways would eventually bring about the downfall of the Dark Elfar, for in the end, such absolutes could only erode the spirits of their race. He intended not only to lead his people to supremacy of the night, but to achieve victory in the world of light as well. But that path would be most treacherous, and only a select few of his lieutenants could be trusted with the knowledge of his plans. It would take expert planning. It would take the master of plans within plans. Gripping the gunwale, he searched the horizon for the north passage that Andriol had assured them was there. His warship was skillfully manned, and he had the utmost confidence in their success. But overconfidence often killed even the most skillful, especially when they let their ego replace carefully laid plans. When they disembarked within the safe harbor of the Bay of Cod, his first move in this game of Setch would then be made. One-Eye Jax. Do you expect us to believe that Vlad found a ship that could travel to the stars? No, Garrett, I said. There's no way that I can prove to you that the Duaredheim craft was real, but maybe you can believe that such a thing might be possible. Only winged creatures can fly, Eric said. Not so, I said. For surely you have seen the balloons of a jester or the umbrellas of a dandelion's flower. I never thought of that. And if such simple things can fly, then could it also be possible that a machine could be so cunningly made that it could travel to the stars? I guess so. Don't worry too much about it now, because Vlad's ship was only the beginning, and my tale won't speak of it again until we are somewhere near to the middle. Let me take you again to those early days when we rode off towards the unknown. Wolf Glen. Waysboro slowly Waysboro slowly shrank away to the south. All around them spread the lush green farmland that made the area such an important part of the kingdom. The thick, fertile soil had gone a long way toward naming the region safe haven, and the forest that had once grown here had provided the first pilgrims with the necessities for survival. Passing tenant farms and a few small merchant caravans along the way, they began to hear stories of troubles in the north. A family of traders claimed that a Red Orcan horde was assembling for a full-scale invasion, but their information was second-hand and difficult to believe. They also heard that many people were fleeing southward with all of their worldly possessions in the hopes that they could find shelter in the strongholds there. D'Artin and Leander passed the idle moments of their journey away with stories of ancient dragons and many rumored tales of Baron de la Roche's 7 daughters. The following 2 days of their trip continued in a similar fashion without incident. On the third afternoon, they approached Balder Garrison, a small stockade-style outpost responsible for protecting the lands north of Waysboro. Situated just east of the road, it was the home of the 2nd Battalion of the Black Dragon Regiment. It was a unit with a long history of valor, and it had made itself famous in the Battle of Varnish, a tremendous struggle in which the badly outnumbered Black Dragons faced and defeated an invading army of Jackaloids and Goblins. It was a battle that had left the bodies of friend and foe scattered across several square miles of rolling terrain. Usually riders could be seen going to and from the garrison throughout the day, with several guards posted atop the watchtowers at all times. As the adventurers approached the stockade, they could see but 2 guardsmen standing in the tower above the main gate. Indeed, the entire post seemed deserted, except for these 2 men. Carmen, riding in the forefront, hailed the gate guards. "You there! Where has the detachment gone? Is there any news from the north?" "Nay, my lady. Baron Dutchings of Nordtown has called for any reinforcements that he can muster. He fears a great threat from the north, from the Red Orcan tribes." "Have they attacked already?" "Only flanking raids so far," the guard said. "No more news has come in for nearly 2 weeks, though. Who can guess?" "It seems strange that the whole garrison has gone." "The Baron must have some influence over the king, my lady, for the entire Black Dragon Regiment has gone to his call." "Quickly, Kalor, Leander, we must waste no time. Long live Lord Cherrick," she cried as the 2 soldiers raised their hands in salute. Spurring Alger back toward the Great North Road, she led the way to Thievestown. With nearly the same fervor, her 4 companions kicked their heels into the flanks of their sturdy mounts and raced after her. By nightfall, they had reached Wolf Glen, a small wood a half-day's ride away from Con Crossroads, the center of Thievestown. Finding a much-used campsite, they started a fire and cooked a hearty, if not tasty, meal of trail rations and prepared their bedrolls. Their dinner-time conversations were more serious than usual. Indeed, they were beginning to wonder just what they had gotten themselves into. "There must be a serious fight brewing," D'Artin began, while tearing a strip of salted beef from his travel rations and chewing upon it thoughtfully. "To call the entire Black Dragon Regiment to arms, and then leave all of these farms unprotected." Pardon me. "You're right, D'Artin," Carmen said, gesturing. "The trouble seems to be from the north alone. Dreadmore Forest would be my guess. Probably just trouble from the local tribes," Kerr said. "Goblins from the Ogre Fangs and nothing more. Don't get yourselves all worked up over a little border clash." Draining the last of his water skin in a long, satisfying gulp, he wiped his beard upon his sleeve, indicating that he was finished. It was not his way to make a tale grow in the telling. Their conversations continued long into the night. A light rain began to fall about the glen. Kalor was silent beneath his small canvas tent, coursing through his book of shadows with the light of a small candle to read by. Within it were all his incantations of illusion and magic. Studying them diligently, he chose to memorize those spells he felt were the most useful to their adventure. Leander was high atop a large twisted oak tree, his sharp eyes able to penetrate the dark of night better than any humans could. Holding his powerful longbow in his hands, he watched Dartin bring their horses in from a nearby field. His guard post could be the most important of all, and he was ever ready to send a shaft where it was most needed. Although Carmen felt as safe here as anywhere in the kingdom, her long experiences in the western foothills had taught her that danger often struck when it was least expected. We'll post guards throughout the nights from now on. There's no telling how dangerous this mission might be. Leander's got first watch, then Dartin, Kayla, and me. Kerr will take cleanup and breakfast. Her companions seemed content to follow her lead. Staking their horses beneath a nearby pine grove, Dartin laid his bedroll out beside him. Too tired to remove his heavy ringmail armor, he laid his shield and mail-encircled helm upon the ground beside him. Lying down to rest, he slept as he always did in the field, with his sword in his hands. Kayla was on guard toward midnight. The rain had stopped, leaving only the great darkness of a cloud-filled sky. He was the first to hear the faint crunch, crunch of many four-footed animals approaching their camp from the east. Concentrating on the sounds, his trained ears could make out between 10 and 14 individuals moving swiftly toward their camp. The first of their howls confirmed his fears. Wolves. It seemed very strange because the wolves of the glen had never been known to attack groups of men before. Taking no chances, he moved to awaken the party as quietly as possible, so as not to betray their individual positions. He found them to be awake already, save for Dartin. Unlike her comrades, Carmen's eyes couldn't penetrate very far into the dark woods. Gathering up the tinder that Kerr had placed beside the fire pit for morning, she struggled with her flint and steel. She needed the firelight to see, but the moist tinder refused to light. Her terror escalated, for she could feel the wolves' predatory eyes upon her from within the surrounding darkness. Kaylor saw the black forms approaching her. They were fanning out around their campsite, and they were huge. Surely these were no normal wolves. With only seconds to act before the animals would be upon her, he shouted, "Stand back, Carmen," and invoked the power of a spell he'd just learned. "Permito, ibi, sum ignis," he chanted, hurling a pinch of sulfur toward the cold campfire. Feeling his connection to the universal force, the source of all magic, he focused its energy. Channeling its power with his own will, he lanced the energy down and the fire pit burst into life. The erupting flames showered Carmen with sparks and illuminated the woods around her. When her eyes adjusted to the newfound light, the young gallant saw her plight. 6 pairs of eyes, glowing red in the firelight, were glaring at her, and all about them she could feel the presence of evil. Standing alone, she drew her sword and snatched a large burning brand from the fire. Crouching patiently, though afraid, she waited for their charge. Leander watched the scene unfold from the treetop, straining his eyes to more clearly see the approaching beasts. He reached out with his mind, seeking to gather the wolves' intentions. It was a skill that he'd only recently discovered, that he had with horses, dogs, and other trained animals. What he found in the wolves' minds was anything but natural. His revulsion was so great, in fact, that he nearly fell from the tree. Realizing that his ways would be of no help against these abominable creatures, he hastily climbed down from his perch. Jumping the last 10 feet to the forest floor, he nocked an arrow. Rushing across the clearing to Carmen's right flank, he stood peering at the dark forms circling beyond the borders of the firelight. His night vision had been compromised to the fire, and now he could see no better than Carmen. Dartin and Kaylor stayed with their horses. The spirited animals had scented the wolves and begun to panic. The sound of Kerr's crossbow firing betrayed his hiding spot. It wasn't wasted, however, for the shaft found its mark upon one of the wolves. The presence of a wounded member within their pack seemed to spark a chain reaction, and each of the other beasts rushed in for the kill. They didn't attack their own, but rather they fell upon their prey. Their attack was one of utter savagery. Another drink. Sorry, lads, but the night grows late, and I'm sure that you're in no mood to hear the rambling of an old gnome any longer. Examining my pipe, I discovered that I'd drawn the last bit of smoke from it that I could, and that I'd drunk the last of my ale. We can stay for a bit more, young Eric said. Can't we, Garrett? It's not even midnight yet. I don't know, Eric. We've got to get some rest before tomorrow's journey. Surely we can't leave now, Polly said. The story is just starting to get good. Come on, Garrett, Eric pleaded. Of course Garrett is right, Eric, I agreed. You've got to get up early and ride for Highcrest Garrison. Besides, what interest could you have in stories told by an old gnome anyway? No. The three of you should go on up to bed and never mind any more stories from an old fool. Are you kidding, Eric said, hardly able to contain his interest. I could stay here and listen to you for as long as you've got a tale to tell. What happens to Carmen? Do the wolves eat her? I bet Kerr cuts them up good with his axe. No way, Eric, Polly said. There were way too many wolves for them to have survived. Well, Garrett said, maybe we can stay a little while longer. Very well, lads, I said. Perhaps a little willow root tea to warm the old bones, though. I'll get it for you, Eric said, leaping to the task. I've got to know what happens to Carmen, Sonia said, and how they could possibly have survived against so many wolves. The old gnome continued, Well, it's quite a long story, you see, Sonia. Those wolves weren't just ordinary commonplace wolves. They were dire wolves. And there's only a few of those horrible creatures left in the entire world. But that night, a powerful sorcerer controlled them. He had concealed himself deep within the shadows of the woods so that no one might discover him and thwart his plans. Oh, he was evil, all right, but we never even knew that he was there, at least not until later. Black-hearted wolves. The wolves attacked, their feral jaws slavering in their unnatural hunger. Their eyes gleamed dull red in the moon's light, and their coats were the deepest black, and all about them was the smell of death. Ordinary wolves would never have attacked men camped near a fire, and mankind was certainly not their natural food. Yet these were no ordinary wolves, and it seemed that some supernatural force was driving them to attack. For a moment, Carmen stood alone. Their campfire had burst to life beside her, and it was burning strongly. Her body stood out like a pillar of light, and the flame's reflection coursed along the length of her sword. Her auburn hair fell back upon her studded leather tunic in a long braid, and her eyes glittered with terrified determination. The lead wolf was rushing toward her, its jaws bared, in anticipation of an easy kill. It leaped from 10 feet away, and she sidestepped. Bringing her sword down in a one-handed slash, she cut deeply into the beast's shoulder. The jarring impact nearly sent her sprawling into the fire. The creature was at least twice her weight. Leander had intended to make his stand beside her. Loosing 2 arrows into the charging wolves, he quickly found himself in as dire of a position as hers. 2 of the beasts had circled behind him. Drawing his scimitar, he tossed his bow to the side not a moment too soon. The first wolf was already airborne. White-fanged jaws sought his throat. If his battle instincts had been any less, the wolf would have claimed his life upon completion of its leap. But the Leander did not intend to match the beast's superior strength. Dropping suddenly to his knees, he drove his sword's point into the underbelly of the monster, and it was the wolf and not he that was finished. But the cunning wolves hunting Leander were not 1 but 2, and there was no time for him to redirect his attack. He only had time enough to turn and face his ultimate doom. The monster's charge overwhelmed him. His scimitar was torn from his grasp, and he was borne to the ground. In desperation, he tried to fend off the animal's rabid jaws, but he received many deep cuts from the beast's terrible claws. But strangely, the wolf's strength diminished, and its attacks became death throes. He could smell death in the creature's own blood, and it brought about a terrible loathing within him. Looking down, he could see only the hilt of his sword protruding from the animal's chest. With a mighty effort, he rolled the beast off of himself. Even in death, its red-rimmed eyes stared at him as if they were jealous of his own life. Struggling to wrestle his blade free of the wolf's body, He was slammed in the shoulder by yet another wolf's rush. An instant following victory, he was again fighting for his life. 3 ravenous wolves harried Carmen. To avoid being brought down, she lashed out frantically with burning brand and bloodied sword. Her hopes rose when the wolf that she'd first wounded went down. A black-shafted bolt had struck it behind the ear. Soon after, the war cry of a sturdy dwarf echoed throughout the wooded glen. "For the might of Clengedius," Kirk cried. "Long live Lord Min, at the heart of the volcano." Kerr's battle cry told Carmen that he'd abandoned his crossbow for his keen, double-edged battle axe. Now it was only 2 against her 1. Dartin and Kalo were little more fortunate than their comrades. With terrible cunning, the fell wolves worked around them in a strange counter-circle, panicking the horses by running in and slashing at their flanks with their tremendous fangs. All the horses, save the ones they held, broke loose from their tethers and fled wildly into the night. 2 of the fleeing horses were quickly set upon by several of the beasts. Dartin knew that these creatures were more monsters than wolf, for no normal wolf would ever possess such a reckless lust for blood. 4 wolves circled them. Their horses would soon be uncontrollable. "Kalor, let them go. If we cannot slay these creatures, there won't be any of us left to ride them." His attack strategy was simple. Fearing an overwhelming rush from the enemy group, he initiated the attack himself and charged. "Odin, guide my blade." Stepping forward and hewing mightily, he instantly killed the first wolf in his path. The beast had leaped for his throat, and he had brought that very fate upon the wolf itself. Ducking beneath the falling body, he trusted in his banded mail armor to protect him. Pressing on with all his strength, he heaved the dying wolf over his shoulders and into the surrounding brush. He knew that fatigue would come quickly from such a tremendous exertion, so he tried to control his breathing and relax as best he could. His battle-heightened awareness sensed Kalor close behind him. The sound of his small bowstring confirmed his thoughts. "I am his shield. So much the better for a follower of mighty Odin." His faith gave him an unnatural strength in battle, and his resolve to survive kept him fighting on. With an overhead block that strained his tendons to their limits, he caught the next leaping wolf upon his shield and thrust up with his longsword. Its point exited the animal's back through its spine and was trapped. Unfortunately, Kalor's next arrow didn't stop the 3rd wolf's onrush. The massive creature leaped only a moment after its slain comrade had come to rest atop Dartin's shield. He and the 2 wolves crashed down. Hellfire warrior of Odin beneath black-hearted wolves. Struggling to free himself, Dartin found his sword arm pinned beneath the dead weight of the lead wolf. His shield arm was occupied with keeping his enemy's killing jaws and terrible claws away from him. He knew that his arm would soon grow tired, and that would be his end. If Dartin had been alone, then surely he would have fallen for the last time. But he was not alone. Kalor had rolled clear at the last moment. Coming quickly to his feet, he fitted an arrow, firing it at Dartin's foe. Striking the beast high on the shoulder, he failed to achieve a killing shot. To the great wolf, the bar was little more than a nuisance. It was, however, enough to redirect the monster's malicious intent. It had been injured twice by this troublesome little pest, and it would tolerate no more. His flame-red eyes of hate gleamed with killing lust as it leaped toward Kalor. Kalor tucked and rolled in a tumbling maneuver taught to him by his mentor. It was enough to escape the injured wolf, but not enough to escape the feral teeth of another beast charging him from behind. The glancing blow tore into his shoulder and knocked his short bow from his hands. When he regained his senses, he suddenly found himself facing not 2, but 3 wolves. His bow was out of reach. Only his daggers remained. He did his best to threaten the wolves with his pointed barbs, but he knew that they were toying with him in a game of cat and mouse. His situation was desperate. "Dartin," he pleaded as he tumbled and slashed. "Get them off me!" If only he'd had time to study more of his new spells. Dartin knew that every moment counted. As soon as the wolf had leaped off of his chest, he heaved the remaining dead carcass off of himself. Only when he'd finished tearing his sword loose and regained his feet did he notice that he was injured. His armor was nearly torn from his body, and a slashing bite had torn a hole from his navel to his chest. The wound burned horribly from some type of venom, and he began to feel its poisonous efforts to paralyze him. Only Kalor's small size and acrobatic skills were keeping him alive. He knew that his luck would soon run out, along with what was left of his energy. He needed an ally. He needed Dartin! Dartin needed no such prompting. Screaming out against the pain, he clenched his teeth and moved into the fray. Hewing in desperation, he struck the flank of the wolf nearest to him and watched in silent fascination as it slowly fell to the ground. Was it the effects of the poison? Somehow time seemed to have been altered. He had severed its spine. Its lower body was paralyzed and useless. He was fighting detachedly as if he viewed his body from above. The moment that the wolf fell, his body stepped into the gap that it had created and lashed out again. This time the wolf was faster, and his sword struck only the ground. Looking to his ally, he saw Kalor hurl a pair of balanced knives into the wolf that he just missed. The animal tried to tear the blades free with its own jaws, but only succeeded in fatally injuring itself. Slinking a step or two more, it collapsed in its final death throes. An instant later, his pain was again his own. With Kalor beside him, they advanced on their final foe. Meanwhile, Leander faced difficulties of his own. His right arm was paralyzed and numb from the wolf's rabid salvation. The wolf that he faced was circling him, just waiting for weakness to overcome him. Staring into his eyes, it waited for his end and an easy kill. His left hand gripped his scimitar. Backing into the nearest tree, he made his stand. Fear gripped his heart as the beast's foul poison worked its way across his shoulder. Focusing his will, he fought against the fog of pain trying to blind him, and called upon the powers of nature to heal him. It was a power that the Druids could call upon for healing and other uses. As an initiate in the forests of Arundel, he'd learned the theory and faith behind those powers, but he'd never actually been instructed in how it was done. It was now, during his greatest moment of need, that he'd wished that he'd been taught. Sylvanus, hear my gentle cry for help. Heal my body and purge this unnatural poison. He may have finished his prayer, that is, if the fell wolf had not chosen that same moment to strike. Kerr chanted, Clang, clang, Clangetius. From Morideus' anvil to Dumatheus' halls, I feel the god of war strike through my bones. Double-edged axe against a foul foe. Dwarven warriors strike high and low. And so Kerr sang as he worked his wicked axe among countless dark enemies. His lust for battle grew with every step and scything arc of his muscular arms. He hewed an intricate pattern about himself for the greatest protection against multiple foes, and sealed the fate of the first wolf in his path. So forceful was the blow that the wolf's skull was cloven in two. The exploding gore only fueled his lust for blood. His revulsion became conviction. Extracting his blade with a short kick from his iron-shod boots, he advanced toward the wolf circling Leander. Seeing that the half-elf was in serious trouble, he realized grimly that he wouldn't be there in time. Raising his axe to the high overhead position, he waited. His timing would have to be perfect. Carmen's armor was stained black with wolf's blood. Two beasts threatened her, and she saw that her companions were in no position to help her. Hoping to find luck in offensive action, the wolves proved too cunning. Rushing in simultaneously, the lead wolf cut sharply left and moved behind her. The trailing wolf took two great strides and vaulted high into the air. The first wolf's rush distracted her, causing her guard to drop left. She couldn't raise her sword in time to meet the second beast's attack. Indeed, her great strength of limb might have held out against the force of the hurtling wolf. That is, if the second wolf hadn't been braced to hamstring her. The sound of her landing echoed like the sound of a hammer upon an empty drum, driving the wind from her lungs like air from a bellows. In an instant, the beasts were upon her. Now Dartin and Kalor had the advantage. One wolf remained between them and Carmen. The ever-watchful eye of Odin seemed to flare with its own firelight upon Dartin's shield. With a swordsman's shuffling step, he advanced on guard, his sword held high for a killing stroke. Feeling the effects of the beast's poison, He knew that he had to end the fight quickly. The wolf sensed D'Artagnan's weakness and was content to lash out swiftly and retreat. It was waiting for paralysis to finish the struggle. Strangely, it seemed to hear victory in the howls of its brethren atop Carmen's writhing body. This victim could be killed later. Breaking off its attack, it turned and ran toward the clearing, toward the sound of helpless prey. Retrieving his bow, Kalor assessed the situation. Fitting an arrow, he drew his bow to full draw. Thumb to cheek, he carefully sighted down the arrow's length and timed to guess lead on the running wolf. When his bowstring sung, the beast tumbled, a red-fletched arrow piercing its lungs and heart. The animal tried to bite at the arrow's protruding head, but these were its final death throes. In a moment, its torment was ended. In a moment, it was dead. D'Artagnan struggled to reach Carmen in time. Limping through the woodland brush, his breathing ragged from exertion and pain, he tried to summon the strength to go on. The venom was slowing his limbs. His wounds made each step a bitter agony. But his survival lay suspended in the next tiny moments in time. He had to drive on. Kalor fitted another arrow and searched for an open shot. The black-hearted wolf thought that this kill would be easy. The taste of human blood was driving his desire for frenzy, and when its prey's arms could no longer find the strength to hold their weapons, it knew that the time was ripe for the kill. Its quarry was helpless. The time for ravaging had come. With the mightiest haunches of all the great wolves, it flew toward Leander. The beast never knew what hit him, for a keen-edged battle-axe slammed into its head and neck with tremendous force. Thrown off course, the animal's body landed in a heap several yards to the left of its intended target. "Thought you could use a little help, Ash," Kerr joked. "I never knew that you were a southpaw." Seeing his salvation, the young woodsman surrendered to his own exhaustion and slid to the ground, all the while mumbling a few incoherent words of condemnation towards dwarves in general, and Kerr in particular. With the last of his consciousness, he tried to focus again on the pattern of healing and cleansing. Kerr knew that Leander needed his help, but he knew that their immediate threat had to be dealt with first. Like the others, he saw Carmen's body being torn at by the wolves, like young pups fighting over an animal skin. Praying for speed, he retrieved his axe and raced toward the clearing. Numerous branches slapped at his face as he tore through the woods. His anger grew and grew. She had fallen, but she hadn't quit. Two of the terrible beasts had locked their jaws upon her right leg, while a third had a tearing grip upon her left shoulder, shaking her viciously in the manner of such canines. She screamed against the pain, losing her grip on both sword and burning brand. If not for her well-fashioned armor, she would already have been torn apart. As it was, she had to fight against the tremendous pain of tearing sinew and the horrible pressure of their immense jaws. With a valiant effort, she tried to reach for her sword, but the world seemed to close in around her. Mercifully, her pain was leaving with her consciousness. The last thing that she saw was D'Artagnan's wounded form entering the clearing, the ever-watchful eye of Odin blazing upon his shield. With the last of her strength, she smiled. Okay, we'll end episode 10 here on page 134. We'll begin again in the same spot. So today's episode 10 was pages 117 to halfway through 134. And remember, as always, read Kerr's Rage, Part 1 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga, and all of its following books by me. Have a great night. Thank you.